G'day guys, this is Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, and I'm here for another expert masterclass with Bryan Santos of Merger and Acquisition Solutions. I've known Bryan for a little while now through a mastermind group that we're a part of together, and as soon as Bryan told me what he did, my ears pricked up. I was immediately intrigued, and this was obviously prior to this whole coronavirus thing scaling out of getting out of control. However, from having conversations with Bryan recently, we both agree that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity that's going to come off the back of this situation. So I wanted to take an opportunity to really pick Bryan's brain, share some of his genius, and help you guys see the light through the trees, which is what this expert masterclass series is all about. So Bryan, thanks for joining us, mate. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. I mean, in spite of everything that's happening in the world around us, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thanks for asking.
That's great to hear, mate. So let's talk about you and your business, mate. What's your story?
So my story is, I mean, I've always been working with businesses to help them grow. My first job out of uni was with a business coaching and consulting company, and learned really quickly that I loved business and I loved helping people. And I've been involved in my own businesses along the way and helped hundreds of businesses along the way as well in all sorts of industries. And probably over the last 6, 7, 8 years, I've focused more of my attention, my specialty on growing businesses who are stuck on a certain level, grow to that next level, mainly by mergers and acquisitions and capital raising and doing it that way. And what I call combining internal growth with external growth, and the internal growth meaning working on your sales, your profitability, your systems, etc., your cash flow, and your external growth being growing by mergers, acquisitions, and a variety of external growth options.
Fantastic, mate. And look, I think for most of us, when we think of mergers and acquisitions, we think of like big companies like Apple and Google, where they've kind of found this like tech startup and they've bought it
Yes,
for $1 billion, and
absolutely.
it seems like a big player game. Is that true?
There is a level where there are the big corporates, and they are uh, it is an active space, but the SME, the small to medium sized enterprise space, is an often forgotten about space. But the ones who are active in that mergers and acquisition space, it sounds like a technical term, but basically it means grow by buying or combining with another company. And a lot of the small to medium sized enterprises sometimes do that as a way of natural progression. But if you do it in an organized and strategic way, it's a way to grow quite fast, and especially during these times as well. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, it is a corporate uh, um, strategy that a lot of the corporates use a lot, but it's definitely available in terms of strategies and opportunities for the SME space as well.
Beautiful, mate. I'm really looking forward to digging into that today, because we see the value of mergers and acquisitions. We've made 4 acquisitions in our business,
Mm,
and we saw that it was a great opportunity to potentially just find smaller businesses that potentially there's somebody who wants to exit the industry, wants to get out, wants to pull up
mm,
stumps, and essentially integrate them into our business.
totally.
And it's been a really great strategy. However, from our conversations, you've blown my mind around some of the other things that we didn't even realize were possible. So let's talk about some of the details of what you do, maybe some case studies, some examples of how you work with your clients.
Sure. So, I mean, the most recent one is we're working with a law firm, a law practice, and they had also been involved in some merger and acquisitions with some other smaller firms. They're based in the city, in the heart of the city, and they approached us to basically help them grow faster. This was pre coronavirus, and actually this is, they've come to the realization this is the time for them to really accelerate what we're looking at doing with them. So with this particular client, they wanted to grow to the next level. I mean, they're a great law firm, but for them to go to the next level and expand into the other cities rather than start or open up offices in all the different places that they want to grow to, they're looking at sort of tucking in, what we call tucking in other practices underneath them. So we created a version of a merger where basically it's a non-equity merger. So essentially we find there are some other firms out there who want to utilize the resources and credibility, office space, staffing, the marketing team, the sales team, etc., etc. Because one of the biggest problems or issues that a lot of the law firms, the smaller law firms, the mid-sized law firms face is the paperwork, the administration, all that sort of back end that takes away the practice owner or the principal from doing what they do best, which is helping others with legal issues. And so we approached a few firms, and basically we are tucking them in under this larger law firm. And what that means is for the smaller law firm, they are essentially eliminating a lot of their overheads with this one transaction. And in return for that, we've got like I said, a non-equity merger type of situation, which essentially means that the revenue is split, the expenses are shared in the equal manner, and the profits are shared in an equal manner. So they become, and basically the result of that in dollar terms, without giving you actual figures, is after a 12-month period, without growing the top line fees, this smaller firm will have doubled their profitability without growing their top line revenue. And that profitability, and that's even after the sharing of the profitability with this larger firm. Wow. So it becomes, for our client, it becomes a scalable thing that really doesn't require any cash outlay, really. They already have the resources there. They have the capacity, they have the skill set. So for example, this smaller firm doesn't need to bring, this combined firm now doesn't need 2 receptionists, doesn't need 2 office managers. They can get rid of their rent. They'll share the rent with, their portion of the rent with this larger firm. So, and all that back end sort of stuff, which has been their headache, is now looked after by the resources of this existing firm. So, wow. And again, just we're talking to a bunch of others, and we'll be tucking them in, like I said, over this next period.
And mate, this is a great case study, because I think many of us as business owners, we're looking straight ahead. We're just got our head down, our bum up. We're just doing what we have always done. And particularly in the light of, I guess, in the face of adversity, of everything we're going through right now as business owners, we just feel like we've just got to work harder and push our way through this. But sometimes thinking laterally, looking sideways and looking for other experts like yourself to bring new ideas to the table, like a business owner would never even think of doing something like this. And I guess this is where the opportunity lies right now, because I think businesses in this current environment need to be smarter, right?
Yes, 100%. And in fact, a lot of us don't have a choice. This is the time to really adapt and think outside of the square. And even if you can't think outside of the square, mingle with those who can, and feed off of them and see what you can and can't do.
Yeah, and look, I had a conversation in another masterclass yesterday with our accountant, Danny Chair from Kelly Partners. And I guess we're talking about the impact that's had on many businesses, particularly in the hospitality and the tourism and the fitness space. And I guess we had a part of it got a little bit grim of talking about liquidating. And obviously in this stimulus, they've relaxed the rules in terms of the liquidation penalties. And it was brought up the fact that the ATO is probably not going to scrutinise as much at the moment if businesses choose to liquidate. But the option that is still on the menu for many businesses, if they are in that position, is having these types of conversations. Now, of course, they've got to be able to remain liquid and be able to maintain solvency whilst they try and negotiate these types of deals. However, it's an option on the menu that many people probably haven't thought about.
Yeah, totally. Totally. The way I see it is we all have our strengths. We all have our capabilities. we also have our weaknesses and the things that we are maybe not always weak at, but we just don't have the capacity or capability of doing. Like with this law firm, for example, yes, they could do the administration side, the paperwork and all that sort of stuff, but in terms of their capacity for them to grow, that's what was holding them back. So if you're in a situation right now where you feel like it is the end, where you have to look at liquidation, excuse me, or look at some sort of closure of some kind, what I would do is think, okay, well, if I had, the thing that's holding me back, if I had the thing that is causing me to close down, which is in most cases more customers, or in some cases it's the staff, the ability to pay the staff to deliver the service or product that I need to then sell. Whatever that is, I would look to see, well, first of all, identify what that is causing, I guess, or resulting in us having to close down. And then number two is who else has that might be in even a similar situation to me, or might be in a better situation to me, and what ways can I look to collaborate, join forces, sell to them, merge with them. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can look at it. I mean, it's during the times of, for example, in war, when countries and other defense forces come together and collaborate, where one might be strong in, the air, one might be strong, in the land and the sea. So the best time, or the times to collaborate are sometimes, the best times are sometimes when it's in crisis mode. So
100%.
Before doing all of that, I would suggest just seeing what else is out there. Who else can help me? Who else can I combine my resources and efforts with? We're doing this right now with a new client, a digital agency. They're a larger agency. They have those resources. They have obviously having to cut their costs where they can, but again, they don't want to. They'd rather not. So they are looking to help other agencies, not just here, but overseas as well, and utilize their resources so that these other agencies who would otherwise be competitors or complementary businesses tuck in and utilize their resources, and then they help them, the guys who are struggling, grow or at least survive, and allow themselves to survive at the same time.
Yeah, it's a great concept, and I think we're going to explore this a little bit more.
Sure.
So let's talk about the why. Why is this an opportunity now? So let's talk about people on both sides of the transaction.
Sure.
So the business that is obviously the typically the larger business, right? The one that's looking to grow faster. Why have acquisitions come up in the conversation? What has normally happened internally within their business that's then resulted in them having to look outside of the current opportunities inside?
Yeah, so a lot of it's crazy. So I am getting calls and people reaching out, people from the woodworks that I haven't heard in ages, all of a sudden reaching out to me now. It's crazy times. But there are two sides, like you're suggesting, of this fence, and those guys who are able to grow and are looking for the opportunities to grow in this environment, and those who are actually looking to survive and struggling to survive even. So those guys who have the opportunity to grow and who are looking for opportunities via mergers and acquisitions, the reason why this is an ideal time for them is because during times of downturn, not even crisis, just downturn in the marketplace, is usually when you have more flexibility and negotiation room in terms of not just price, but also terms, and also the creative ways you can put deals together. It just opens up the opportunity or the discussions to be able to have those, to talk about all the different options and work things through. Whereas in an upwards market, no one's really open to that because they're busy, they're fine, they don't need any external help. And it's just like, I guess, with the property market or even the stock market, a lot of people look to the downside to profit, and I hate saying that in these difficult times when people are actually dying. But from a business sense, from a survival sense, sometimes the best way or the best opportunities are when you can negotiate when people are more open.
Awesome. Okay. And then on the flip side, I guess, as business owners, many of us have a little bit of a chip on our shoulder, a bit of an ego. So I expect that you've got a client that's looking for opportunities to grow. You've got a brief of what they're kind of looking for, and then you go out to start trying to start these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Why do these other individuals ultimately concede that they want to entertain the conversation and not just say, Bryan, don't talk to me, I'm not interested?
Sure. Again, let me give you a specific example. This digital agency, we're speaking to other agencies, direct competitors. We're speaking to complementary businesses, so businesses that might be in addition to their expertise, and supplementary businesses. So even suppliers to up the vertical chain, up and down the vertical chain, or across horizontally. Excuse me. And the reason why they're interested, at least the people that I've been speaking to, they're open to it, is because, yes, they're going through some tough times at the moment, but we also have to realize that through these tough times, there will also be an afterwards time. There will be some time when this all subsides, that for those of us who survive, have the opportunity to thrive and potentially slingshot on the upside. So, if you think of the curve, it's like that, right? I mean, it's, pretty much like that, our economy and a lot of the situations in businesses, but it's not always going to be like that. It's not, right? So there will be a bottoming out, and there will be a correction in that curve, in that growth curve. So if we are there at the time to survive during those periods, these are the times that we'll be able, it's those times afterwards that we'll be able to thrive. And again, that term thriver, I've heard that term used a lot, but it's the truth.
It is,
If you're able to survive these times, you're able to thrive. And so if you're struggling at the moment and you're wanting to survive, but also looking to ways that you can thrive afterwards, oftentimes mergers, acquisitions, collaborations, joint ventures, some sort of joint forces, or thinking outside of the square, rather than, okay, I've got to get more customers, I've got to save my my customers from leaving, which is absolutely what you need to do. But also there's the opportunity to join forces with other people who may be able to help, whether that mean getting an investor, or selling, or part of your business, or all of your business, whatever the case might be. Or if it's like a non-equity play merger, like I mentioned before, there's a bunch of different ways. But yeah, that's why.
Okay. So let's look at some of the other options that are on the menu. As you mentioned, raising capital is one of the things that you do, and something that we've done in our business as well. And I guess from our own personal perspective, it was really important for us to make sure that somebody had the right values that was coming in as an investor in our business. And what we found is there was sometimes more dollars than cents around in the investment space. Lots of people offering to give us money. However, not many of them shared our values and wanted to be with us on the journey for the right reasons.
Yes.
So why would business consider raising capital, and essentially what's normally involved in that process?
Sure. So first up, with raising capital, there's a lot of regulations involved. You have to do the right thing, and raising money technically has some legal issues that you need to abide by. What I do in terms of raising capital, so my network is broad and large. We have a network of private equity companies, high net worth individuals, investment bankers, and people who are looking for opportunities. So those guys who are looking for opportunities, or those guys who are looking for people or looking to raise money, what I always suggest, well, not always, but in most cases suggest, the best way to raise money is to think strategically. So not money for money's sake, but what's the strategic value, or that money that you're after will provide. So sometimes, and again, I'm thinking of the mergers and acquisitions world. So if I'm looking to raise capital, well, what am I looking to do? Is it raising capital typically is for equity. So you swap equity shares in your company for an investor or investment, and or it's debt, raising debt, to grow or even survive, these times, and then after these times as well. But if you're looking to raise money for equity, you definitely would want someone or a company or an individual or group of individuals who have strategic value and, like you said, have a cultural fit with what you're about and where you want to go. Because I've seen it in many occasions where it just doesn't work for anybody. And especially during these times, we need to be even more diligent about that, because sometimes we might get in a desperate situation where we'll just say yes to people who are willing and able to give us money. But also be cautious about who and why you're being given that opportunity. And also, again, if you think about after this bottoming out of this situation, when it passes, what will be the effects of that afterwards? And the best way to think about that is, again, what's the strategic and cultural fit for you afterwards, not just now, but afterwards as well.
I hear. Now, I posted a question on my Facebook asking for if anybody had any questions for you. And I guess one of the key things here is around business values. I think obviously people are concerned around what is the value of businesses in the current marketplace. Obviously, whenever there's uncertainty, that has to have an impact to business value. So
Totally.
How do you ascertain business value in current market?
That's a really tough one, because business value, there's a number of ways that you can look at it. It's not like property, where it's relatively easy to get market valuation. With business, I can ask you a valuation of a business, I can ask the owner of a business, I can ask my accountant, their accountant, and there'll be 4 or 5 different versions of what the valuation is, right? So it's difficult in the best of times. In these times, it's even more difficult, because really how I would suggest you look at your business valuation is, well, as a buyer or someone looking to invest in it, it's really as, if I'm putting $1 in today, what's the likelihood of me getting that 1 or 2, even $2 back, right? So it's a risk thing right now more than a return thing right now. And then if I did get my return, how long will it take? And then not only how long will it take, but how much will I get? So all those sorts of things need to come into consideration. So so during this time, it is a difficult situation to be in terms of valuing your business. So what I would suggest is, if you can, there are other ways to if you're looking to sell your business, there's a number of different ways you can value it, of course. But if you can survive through this and you're looking for an investor to come in, while the valuation might have dropped significantly, you don't have to value your entire business at that price. So what I mean by that is, for example, we are looking at negotiating a deal at the moment where he's going through that very situation. Okay, well, I would like to sell my part of my business or my business, but the way the market is at the moment, the valuation is just, it's not, I mean, it's giving it away almost. So in order to get some equity, he's selling it at an agreed price that they come in, like a portion of the business. And then once they see see themselves through, then we'll reconvene. We will look at the valuation again. So we don't have to be stuck in that one price at that one particular point in time. And you can even do a version of an earnout or a version of based on KPIs, and we can, so there needs to be some flexibility and understanding with what's going on, obviously.
Makes sense.
Just know there doesn't need to be a hard and fast rule, especially during these times.
Makes perfect sense. And I guess it's interesting to know that doesn't have to be black and white, which I think flows into the next question, Bryan. So a fellow here by the name of Roy asked, I still want to buy out an existing studio and rebrand. Should I go forward or should I hold on for another month? I mean, I expect this is a fitness studio.
Okay. So number one is two things. What's the price and what's the terms, right? So whenever you're looking at the deal, you want to know those two things. So terms would be, obviously price is important, but terms would be super important during these periods. So it depends on the deal. If it's a good deal or a good acquisition, then yeah, consider it. And part of that deal might be, or the terms might be, how much do I have to pay? Can I delay payment or pay over time, for example? Can I reduce the price? Can we defer the down payment, for example, until 6 months, but let me get in and start to see what I can do with the studio, whatever it is. If I could, my advice to you would be, looking at the deal, how can I, not guarantee because nothing can be guaranteed, but
Sure.
how can I best as possible guarantee that this is, I'm not going to go under the gurgler, right? I'm not going to go backwards here after buying it, especially during these times. So I would be looking at those things. And if I can minimize my cash outlay, in fact, I wouldn't put any cash if I can. And if I could just create a deal or a structure, a deal where I didn't have to, and you're minimizing your downside, right? And to minimize your downside in these times, is to minimize your cash outlay.
Yeah.
And then also minimize your liability. So even if you don't have any cash in it at the moment, if, for example, you go, okay, cool, I'm not paying anything, or I've got this deferred or over a 6-month period. Well, what if this goes for 12 months, for example, the closure of schools and all the rest? Then after the 6 months, now you have this liability to start paying for, and what position does that put you in? Those are the sorts of things that I would look at. And so to answer your question, I don't know. I'd have to speak with you and have a closer look.
And I'll make sure that I tag Roy in this, because I think it's on all of these things on a deal by deal basis. It's hard to give a standard go to with these things.
Totally.
From my perspective, the big thing is going to be member retention,
Yes.
having a retention clause in these types of things. We do it with acquisitions that we've done in the past. That if there is drop off in clients, then that obviously has an impact on the multiple that's ultimately paid moving forwards.
Yes.
So it's tough, particularly with these lockdowns. How long is the studio going to be closed?
That's right. And even if things, the lockdown stops, what is the likelihood that the students will come back afterwards like that? Maybe it might take some time, or maybe people can't afford it anymore. Those are sorts of things that we obviously we don't know, but we need to look at the ways to minimize our downside, like I said. Yeah. Minimize our exposure. So the deal that you put together, if you are going to acquire it, needs to cover you on those, in case those things happen.
Yeah, definitely. We had a client recently who was acquiring an allied health business.
Mm-hmm.
They were at the nth hour. Luckily, they had a force majeure clause in their contract, but we did some financial modeling around what's the potential downside risk, and does it make sense to still finalize on the purchase. And ultimately, when we looked at it, given the amount of unknowns, anything more than a 50% reduction in top line revenue would have meant that the business was in substantial deficit. And it's just one of those things that sometimes it's just not worth the risk at this time. So it's about making sure you've got the right terms. They were very lucky. They had the right terms. They got the right legal advice.
Yes. No, and that's actually a very, very good point. You need to get the right advice, right? You need to get the right advice from the right or people who can advise you on the transaction side. You need the right people who can advise you from a legal perspective. And when I say from a legal perspective, not just a lawyer, but a lawyer who's done M&A in the similar size or type of business that you're in. Because, don't just speak to any lawyer. Because again, in these times, who knows what can happen. But if you are covered, and that's their job, is to cover your backside. If they haven't been involved in a similar business or size of business or similar transaction to what you're looking at, or even this creative way of looking at doing a deal, then it puts you at risk because they don't know, right? It's like going to a doctor in this coronavirus time who has no idea what the symptoms are or hasn't been exposed to it or whatever. But they're a doctor for 50 years. But if they haven't been trained on what the latest things are with the coronavirus news or doctor information, scientific information, then you don't want to speak to that doctor about about
100%.
same thing.
And
The same
here's the
thing
thing
would
that's often
happen with
overlooked.
a financial advisor. So this is why your services are super important, because you have been involved in mergers and acquisitions of your own, and you understand this space. So this is really important.
And look, this is the thing. I think it's often overlooked. It's the invisible stuff in business that matters, because you only know if it's been done properly when something goes wrong.
Yes,
And it's like you
it's
don't, when you got a legal contract, it's all you don't know whether there's the right clauses until a problem comes up, and that's ultimately where it costs the most money.
yeah, yeah, and I've seen that. Yeah.
So let's start talking about the how. So we've got a great question here from Ross, and Ross was asking about common steps in a merger and an acquisition. What are the common steps in terms of a normal process that you take your client through? And then on the flip side, where have you seen things go wrong, and what can people do to avoid those problems occurring?
Yeah. So the common steps are, first and foremost, I mean, what I often see are people approach me because they've said, "Hey, Bryan, I know this other company. I think that might be a good opportunity to buy them or merge with them or whatever the case might be." Or, "Hey, Bryan, these guys approached me, or I know these guys in our industry who might be a good opportunity." That's great. But what I would prefer or what I would suggest is to start first with a plan, right? So rather than be reactive to an opportunity, because what that means is if an opportunity arises, great, and we can look at the opportunity. But if an opportunity arises and we're looking at that opportunity as it's come up, we're already down a certain, down the path, uh, um, and which means that we're left with less options and choices to be able to maneuver. Whereas if we started back here and we had the plan and what we were trying to do and how much money or what our budget was, if we had zero or we had a ton of money, then we know, okay, well, what options are available to us, what businesses would be ideal for us, what strategies and processes and things we can best go down to to prevent us wasting our time, and knowing before we've gone down that track, before we've gone down that path, that we know it's a doable deal for us. So that's where I think a lot of people get stuck, is they go, "Hey, I've got this opportunity," but sometimes it's just not a doable deal for whatever reason. Number one, you might not be able to afford what they're asking for. Number two, they might be asking for way too much than what it's really worth. Number three, the owner might not be flexible or whatever. All those sorts of things. If you had, excuse me, identified that earlier on, then you wouldn't have spent the past 2 months or the next 2 months trying to negotiate with this seller. And then you end up doing, because you're so far down the deal negotiation track, they end up doing a deal just to get it over the line, and it doesn't end up being a great deal. But you've got now this asset and liability over your head, and it hasn't really added too much to the value of your business. So that's the first thing. So in terms of the steps, is number one, I would recommend putting a plan together of why you'd be looking at mergers and acquisitions at the moment. What are the options available to you? What's your situation? And then let's see what the market is like by way of opportunities. So that would be the first steps. And what was the second part to your question?
So then what are the common points of breakdown? Where do these things often
Yes.
go wrong?
Okay, so the breakdown can, there's lots of breakdowns in the negotiation or in the purchasing process. Sometimes, and again, this is what I mean by, if you have the right advisors on your side, they will not only protect you, but they will help you. So oftentimes the legal guys and gals and the accountants, the financial guys and gals, while they are there to protect you, both on your side and their side, they are often deal breakers. And so, and they, you know, if you see that happening, don't forget you are the entrepreneur, you are the deal maker putting this deal together. They are your advisors, and so that's something that you need to be very, very mindful of. How a deal can extend, and dealer fatigue can really get in the way, and it can really not only the deal not go ahead, but you might have a worse deal than you originally planned, or you've just wasted 3-6 months. And I can tell you, there's so many people who've told me that you know, they don't want to look at M&A, any mergers and acquisitions anymore, because that was 12 months of my life. You know, that took me away from my you know, me generating more income for the existing business that I have.
100%.
So that's one thing. And then the post acquisition, there is a high failure rate with mergers and acquisitions. You know, I think this statistics are something like 50-60% of acquisitions fail, right? But mind you, a lot of that, you know, includes the corporate acquisitions as well.
Yeah.
So not just SMEs and small to medium sized businesses. So one of the things that you need to, and it comes back to a point that you made, is understand that why, you know, if you're looking at mergers and acquisitions as a growth opportunity or even a survival opportunity, is that it needs to fit A, strategically, and B, culturally, and that you have the buy-in of the key stakeholders. So if you have a general manager or a CEO, whatever the case might be, who's going to be heavily involved in the post acquisition management of it, not just your manager, but their manager, if they're taking it on board, their staff, your staff, if there isn't the buy-in, and I understand that you can't bring up the conversation until you're closer to the acquisition.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that buy-in or a way of getting that buy-in, that can result in the deal not only going sour, but your business going backwards, and you lose not only the value of that acquisition, but the value of your entire business. So having the right buy-in, having the plan to get the right buy-in from all those stakeholders is key, as well as making sure that there is the right cultural fit and strategic fit moving forward.
I think that's super key. Like, there's a couple of points here that I've pulled from this, and a lot of it from first-hand experience. And we had an introducer that we started calling him the chef because he used to cook deals. He just was, he was the opposite of the Midas touch. Everything he touched turned to shit. And there were so many great deals that we aligned from a values perspective. It made commercial sense, but it was cooked by the introducer. And it was so frustrating, Bryan. And so I completely get that. I think you really need to make sure you've got the right facilitator, because it can be the difference between the deal going ahead and the deal not.
Totally. And everybody in the transaction has their own agenda, right? From the introducer, the broker, whoever it is. And if you don't, I mean, absolutely, you can do it yourself. But if you don't have the right people who can manage the process, and that truly is a management process. If you don't manage the egos, the stresses, the agendas of everybody involved, you can completely lose it. And again, I've heard so many stories, but I like that nickname, the chef.
The chef. And I guess the other part is the culture piece. Like, culture, it doesn't matter what business you're in. We're all in people-to-people businesses, right?
Yes.
And you cannot manufacture culture.
Yes.
And trying to merge two separate teams, unless you invest that time on the upfront, I think culture is created from the top down, right?
Absolutely.
And I think if you get clear at it at a leadership level, and then you try and work out how do you work that down, I think you can still get a pretty good idea of what that culture is going to be and whether it's going to be toxic and clash.
Yeah.
And that's probably the hardest part. That's the post game, right?
Yeah. And again, culture requires buy-in, right? It requires agreement, because like you're saying, culture is about people. And if you're telling people, this is the culture, this is our values, right? And I've been in organizations where that's the case, right? Here are our 14 values, right? You got to live it. And then number two, if you tell, and then number two, if you don't live it, like it just becomes nonsense, and that in itself creates a culture of, you know, in itself creates a culture. So yeah, you need the buy-in, you need the agreement, at least from the key stakeholders, the key influencers in that business, because those are the people who will then influence and get agreement and buy-in from their crew or their subordinates or their team or whatever the case might be.
Beautiful, fantastic. Awesome, mate. So let's wrap this up in terms of some actionable takeaways. So there's been tons of gold from what we've spoken about today. If you had to give a few tips of a few words of wisdom, a few actionable insights of, depending on where people are in current environments, what are some of the things that they should be looking to do, even if they've got, say, if they're thinking about a merger and acquisition, and maybe if it's not now, it might be in the future. What are some takeaways?
So number one, I think you have to come from a place with what's happening right now, is to come from a space of adapting, right? So things aren't the same, and things might not be the same for you post this whole crisis. So I think what we need to do is, at least from a mindset point of view, is think of how can we adapt, not just, you know, well, for some of my clients, we've shifted our entire business model, right, to shifting online. And we've spoken about this before, shifting entirely our business model, but also adapting in terms of our message. Sometimes we have to adapt, you know, how we approaching our customers and all the rest, but also adapt our thinking in terms of the opportunity that's, you know, in front of us, or what might be our opportunities in the short term and medium term. So adapt in terms of our thinking that way. So if we're on the side of, hang on a second, we're struggling, or we might not be able to survive this week, or we might not be able to survive after 6 months, well then let's think, how can we, and let's adapt our mindset to thinking about that. If you're on the other side of the fence, where you might be in a good position, and you're you know, wanting to maybe grow and merge and that sort of stuff. If you have the money, if you have the resources, for example, my suggestion, my asking of you would be to, if you have the capacity, if you have the ability, I would suggest looking at ways that you can help. Because in these times, I think this is what, you know, people need. And if you have the capacity, I would suggest having a look at what you can invest in, and of all the things that you can invest in, one of the best things you can invest in is a small to medium-sized businesses, because, as they say, right, they hold our economy up. They give us obviously the employment for all the people that they provide. So I would suggest just looking at that as an option, and helping those businesses, not just helping those businesses get through these tough times and afterwards, but also benefiting yourself, because like I said, there's going to be an afterwards after this whole crisis.
100%. Look, I think the key part here, guys, is that mergers and acquisitions aren't the silver bullet solution. So if you are in a really tough position, you need to consolidate first. Because I think the key part is this is not a rushed process. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, right, Bryan?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And yeah, we need to make sure that we're, as best as we can, keeping ourselves alive and our family and ourselves healthy, and deal what we need to deal with in the short term. But also think outside of the square, outside of the box, because maybe there is an opportunity not just to survive, but like I said, thrive.
Fantastic. Awesome, mate. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your time. There's been some really great and valuable insights that we'll definitely take away, but hopefully everyone who watches this can also take away. It's good to see that there's definitely light through the trees. There is definitely going to be a correction when the tides turn after all of this. And there's going to be an abundance of opportunity that is available for those who can think outside the box and capitalize on those opportunities. So, Bryan, if people want to get in touch with you, how's the best way for them to reach out?
Email me directly. My email is Bryan, Bryan, at mergeracquisitionsolutions.com. So solutions with an S, mergeracquisitionsolutions.com. And if there's any way I can help or put you in the right direction, I'll be happy to.
Fantastic, mate. I'll include all your details in the comments. Guys, if you have any questions for Bryan, feel free to reach out. And Bryan, thanks again. I appreciate you making the time, and I look forward to catching up again soon.
Pleasure, mate. Thanks for having us.